Monitoring systems. In this nugget, we talk about monitoring systems. This can take place a couple of different ways, and one of those is a historical event log where you can identify what has taken place in the past, whether it's an application that crashed or a service that failed to start or whatever. We also will identify within this things such as audit logging, so you can identify who has tried to access various resources. And then we take a look at diagnostic tools. There's so many diagnostics tools, everything from task manager, reliability monitor, data collector sets, power problems that you can explore. So we take a look at quite a few diagnostics tools as well. Back when I was a youngster in grade school, maybe second or third grade, my sisters and I used to come home from school and have our allocated 3 Oreo cookies as an after-school snack. That was the rule. You couldn't have any more than that. Problem is, I love Oreo cookies. And so I would inevitably just eat more and more and more until I would just totally spoil my dinner. Well, my dad decided to rule with the iron fist on that one, and so he cut us off from all after-school snacks since I wasn't able to control myself. And one day, though, he came home from work, and he looked at me and he said, "Jimmy," that's what they used to call me back when I was a kid, Jimmy, but don't you call me that. And he said, "Jimmy, have you been eating cookies?" And I said, "No, Dad, I haven't been eating any cookies." Of course, that wasn't the truth, and I proceeded to get disciplined for my lack of obedience at that time. Something which my backside still remembers, quite honestly. But anyway, I asked my dad later on, "Hey, Dad, how did you know I ate those cookies?" And he said, "Well, you had black stuff all over your teeth," because those Oreo cookies, they leave black stuff on your teeth. So from that point forward, I learned my lesson, and I brushed my teeth every day after I ate some Oreo cookies. Anyway, Oreo cookies are still my favorite. In fact, I have them in my cabinet that I just brought down here. You can see my delicious Oreo cookies in this package. And give me just a minute. I'm going to pause recording, and I'll get right back to you. All right, I'm back, and I promise I only had 3 cookies. Well, what I was just talking about with the cookies, event logs kind of does the same thing. No, it's not going to tell if you've been cheating on your diet. What it does do, though, is it'll identify whether or not something has actually happened. You see, with the event logs, you can see a number of different default Windows logs that appear there. And let's go ahead and take a look at a few of those that appear by default. Those are going to be the application security, setup, system, and forwarded events. Now, the application logs identify mostly just applications. It could be a Windows application that was running. It could be an application that you installed. Either way, you can see here, it identifies various things that have happened. You have 3 different kinds of events that you can see. One is the blue eye on the white background. That's the information. The other one is a yellow triangle with a black exclamation point. And the other one is a red circle with a white exclamation point. Now, you can see the different kinds of things. This one's just information. Doesn't necessarily mean I have to give it any attention or that a problem occurred. For example, here it's just saying that I got my certificate enrollment for local system policy because I have certificate auto-enrollment going on for my computers. So if it did not have a certificate, then it would have gotten a certificate when it checked with the certificate authority. Here we have something that could not be accessed in the client-side cache. Remember I was telling you about the client-side cache in a previous nugget? Well, I've had something that was that I've made available offline, but apparently it couldn't contact the server. So over here, I have an application that I deliberately crashed. This is an application that Microsoft wrote years ago. Gosh, it might have been close to 20 years ago. I don't know. Wrote this a long time ago to deliberately crash so that they could use it for testing purposes. So anyway, you can see the various kinds of events that we have within this. And the application, although it tracks events, you can also take a look at the security event log, and this will identify whether or not you've had special logon or whether you've been able to successfully or unsuccessfully log on, and it will say audit success if you have had success. If you've had a bad password entered in at some time, then it would say audit failure, but I don't really see any here right now. But this will be used to track identity issues. There's also setup, which you don't really deal too much with because Windows has already been installed, so there's not really anything to see there. And then there's also system. This relates to things such as services. So if I have a service that hung on startup and it was not able to properly start up, or if it hung because it was not able to properly shut down, or had some other kind of a problem, then you would see that here. For example, the information item says the volume shadow copied service entered the stopped state. That often happens after a backup is complete, for example. Here we have an error that the terminal server security layer detected in, what is that? An error in the protocol stream is disconnected from that IP address. Oh, that's because I had a remote desktop connection. In fact, we're looking at a remote desktop connection now. But as I recall from this earlier today, that it just disconnected because I had a network interruption. I had a big file transfer going on, and apparently it probably just interrupted the network. So that's another symptom of a kind of a problem you might see. And then finally, there are forwarded events. And we'll talk more about those here in a little while. But first, let's go back up to our main application system setup and so on. Here we can see the number of events that are in each one and how big the log file has gotten. What you can do with this is you can go to the properties of any one of these and specify how big you want to allow the log size to be. And if it reaches its threshold and it goes over, in this case, about 20 megabytes, then what happens? Well, most of the time on workstations, you'll overwrite events as needed. You can also archive the log when full, but do not overwrite events. This means that it'll take the events that are already there, save them in an archive file, and then it will start over again with a fresh, clean log file. You can also say just do not overwrite events, and you'd have to clear logs manually. You got to really watch out for that one, especially on highly sensitive systems, because there might be things that are occurring, such as hacking attempts, that you cannot find out about because the log will stop until you clear the log manually. This one's a pretty good one right there for servers. For most workstations, we'll stick with this one right here. These things are also configurable by group policy objects. So if you wanted to set this up for all your workstations, for example, then you could set this here. And incidentally, if you ever do want to clear the event log for whatever reason, all you have to do is to right-click here, clear the log, and then you can save and clear, or just clear and not be concerned about archiving the data that's already there. Now let's also talk, though, about filtering the event logs, because as you can tell by looking there, that's a lot of data. And it's just, you almost get cross-eyed trying to figure out what to look for, and I can go through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of events, really still not sure if I'm getting to what I need. It could be a big time waster. By the way, I have a friend of mine, or an acquaintance I should call him really, who works at a top secret government facility, and he's been required to view every event log. He has to put his eyes on every event log on their server. The guy's like hugely stressed. He's always got bloodshot eyes and stuff like that. I feel sorry for him. Anyway, so what we could do with this is we could filter if we only want to identify some errors that we've been getting, for example. So maybe I've been getting some red circles with an exclamation point item. I could look for errors. Notice that you can also look for that are also under a specific source. Maybe I've been having trouble with, the calculator application. Maybe it's unable to calculate Bill Gates' wealth. So it keeps crashing. I could check that out. Okay. There's also event IDs. Each event ID has a unique ID, which can also be used to look up the problem at Microsoft's website if they have a record of it. You can also look for specific keywords here if you want, and so forth. You can look for different users that have generated these errors or different computers if you have more than one computer being logged here. But in our case, notice how much easier it is now to look for errors. I've just found these 3 out of the hundreds that were there before. And then when I'm done, I simply clear the filter, and it goes back to its normal view here. Oops, click the home button. That's where I meant to go right here. Okay, so that's what we have got in terms of filtering the event log. And then you can also take the filtered event log, and you can go up to custom views and create a custom view, and then it'll save that view up here all the time. And that might be kind of advantageous because you might not want the filtered view down here all the time. You want to see all the events. But up here in custom views, you want to see only the problem areas. So again, I could go to the errors, and I could say only during the last 7 days, and then I only want to see Windows logs and the application. How about application and system? Okay, let's do something like that. And you get the idea. Various sources. You can look at all event sources if you want to, and so forth. And then I'll just click OK, and then now I'll call this, error log application and system or something like that. And now I can see that right down here in this part of the node, and down in my application log and my system log, I'll see just the normal log that I'd already seen. There's also this default one that's already there, administrative events, which, as you can see here, looks for warnings and errors, so that they kind of float to the top, so that I can immediately identify any persistent problems that I might be experiencing. If you want to go to the properties of this, then you can just click on the properties item right here and then edit the filter if you want to just look at the kinds of things that it's looking for. These are all kind of hard-coded, but it gives you an idea for the kinds of things that it's looking for, critical errors and warnings and so forth. So that's a good idea there. Also, when it comes to the event logs, you can audit object access. Now, some organizations, this is more important than others, but there are certain files that might have high sensitivity. And maybe nobody is supposed to actually be able to read those files. Maybe it's a file that contains the salaries of all of your executives. And you don't want people to view that file and know about it. Well, there's NTFS permissions granted and share permissions, which may help that. And you can also use varying levels of encryption. But you might also want to see who's trying to open it, even if they can't. So with that, you can do something like auditing object access. And that would include files and printers. Now, in order to make this auditing happen, you have to either create a local policy, or in this case, I've gone to the domain to create a policy that's linked to the domain, but you would obviously link this to an OU if that's where you wanted it to apply. And you can see in the path here that I'm in the audit policy under local policies. Then I've gone to the audit object access, where I'm auditing both success and failure. Usually you actually want to audit success and failure, because if you only do failure, then you'll only know when people were unsuccessful in trying to hack into something, for example. Well, maybe they tried 100 times, but on the 101st time they were successful. Well, how will you know if you never audit that? So you have to audit both of those, really, in a good security situation anyway. And then what I want to do here is to go to my computer, where we can see that we've been working on a sensitive document, the financials. And someone who browses this computer might see the financials folder and get curious. Then they see this annual summary, and they say, ooh, hey, I wonder what that is. Oh my goodness, the company profit. We had a net loss of $1.8 million? Why in the world was that? Oh, that explains it. So now what we want to do is to conceal this so that maybe someone can't get in here and edit this document or something like that. So what I'm going to do here is I've gone in here and gone to the properties. This doesn't really lock out all access, but just to show for auditing purposes, I've gone to Rutherford here, and I've clicked on edit and added this person in, so I wouldn't want to allow him to write changes to that. Maybe he's one of the executives, and he's a little embarrassed that his executive compensation was so high. So we want to prevent him from being able to get in there and change it. So here Rutherford logs on, and he sees this annual summary item, and as one of the executives, he double-clicks on it and opens it, and he says, ooh, boy, if this ever gets out that we got paid so much, we could have a big problem here. So he wants to change this to, $0.2 million, something like that. For executives, that's still a lot of money. But anyway, we'll go ahead and save this now so no one ever knows what we've done, and I'll replace it. Uh-oh. That doesn't look good. And indeed it's not, because Rutherford will not be able to save this file in its current location. So what we'll do here is we'll see how that looks in the event log now. So now, having gone back to the event log here, it doesn't look like anything's happening. So what I'll have to do is to refresh the screen, and then we'll see some audit failures in this. If I take a look at this and double click on it, we'll see that indeed it was Rutherford that was trying to make a change to this. So now we can take this to the newspapers, that Rutherford was trying to change his executive salaries and cook the books and so forth. By the way, I've also put a filter on here, which I didn't show you. I mentioned this earlier, and I showed you how to do it earlier. But the filter I put on this current event log was that I only wanted to see audit failures. Because look, if you don't, with some of these event logs, look, there's just all kinds of things involved in this, and I already cleared it once. So see, that's a good example of where clearing where filtering the event log will be very helpful. Now, I also want to talk to you here about event subscriptions. This is a multi-step process, and the purpose of this is that I cannot be everywhere at once. Now, very often I'll actually use this for servers more than workstations, but it could work a couple of different ways. So, for example, I might have, let's just make it simple. Maybe I've got 3 servers out here, and they're highly sensitive, and I've got to take a look at the event logs on these, but I don't really want to walk to each one of these. They might be in different parts of the building, it might be across the campus, who knows, whatever else. But here is my own desktop machine. It's maybe a Windows 7 machine, and with this one, what I can do is to have each one of these machines send me on a regular basis their event logs in an event subscription, so that I can then read all of the event logs on my own machine. Now, another option there, of course, is that you can open up Event Viewer and remotely connect to other machines, but that's an additional series of steps that I would have to take, whereas this is much simpler because it can consolidate all of these event logs into my own event log, and I have a single point that I have to view then. And as I mentioned earlier, this is a multi-step process, and if you take a look, I've created a document here for you that's a PDF file, and it's called Collect Events from Forwarder to Collector. Okay, so there's a forwarder, which will be, in this case, the servers that were in the picture that I drew up there, and then the collector would be you sitting at your Windows 7 machine. This has steps that are involved, and it applies across pretty much all current versions of Windows, as you can see right here. And this just outlines for you all the steps you'll have to take. It's a lot to go through right now for demonstration purposes, but I have already set this up, and so I want to go ahead and show you how this works. Now, some of the things that you'll see configured in that PDF document will involve going to a subscriptions item here on the event viewer. And you can do this on Windows Server 2008, Windows Vista, Windows 7, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter which one is the forwarding computer and which one is the collecting computer. But you'll just right-click here and choose Create Subscription when you do this for the first time. Now, you can see I've already got one going where I want to pull events from Win 7 Enterprise 64. That's just another computer that I have. And you can see here that I've selected that computer. I can also add additional computers if I want. And it's best if you add domain computers. Also, the name of this computer where I'm creating this from, which is my server, must be added to the local event log readers security group on this computer, on this Windows 7 computer, because I have to be trusted in order to be able to read from that log. You can also test this to make sure that you got good connectivity to the destination. A very handy little tool there. And then when you create this for the first time, it'll give you the choice of choosing either collector initiated, which means that this server that we're looking at right now is what's going to initiate the collection, or source computer initiated, which is available when you first create this. And then that would mean then that the destination would go ahead and initiate the collection process. This is probably what's going to be more likely to take place in larger enterprise where you have a great number of machines that you're trying to collect events from, for example. And then you'll select what kind of events you're interested in collecting, whether critical errors, warning, all of the same kind of stuff that we have for filtering there. And then you can also choose advanced items here, which specifies whether you're going to use a machine account to read the source logs. That's why you have to add the computer account of this server in this case to the event log readers security group over on the destination. And then you specify what kind of delivery optimization you want. Just normal, which is kind of a balanced optimization. Minimize bandwidth, which will wait longer between collection events. And then minimize latency, which will be about every 5 minutes. Okay, and then you can cancel all of this out for the time being. You can also do this using HTTPS if you want. But what's gone on here is I've also gone to the source computer, which is over here, the same one that we were looking at earlier. And I went and created a couple of crashed events. Let me show you what I mean. I went over here and went to some sources. And here's how I've just navigated my way over here to a little application called BadApp32. And the only purpose of this application is to crash on purpose. Some of you might be wondering, why did Microsoft create this? They already have applications that crash on purpose. But this one is actually designed to crash so that you can use it for testing purposes, much like what I'm doing right now. And we're going to see here that it's going to try to close up here in a moment. There it is. So I'm going to close the program. And then what I want to do is to go back over to that server, and then we should be able to see collected events or forwarded events over here. Now, it'll take a few minutes before that crash that I just created shows up, but here's something that I created yesterday and the day before just by way of testing. And we can see here that I've got an error that took place. I've got a couple of errors that occurred. Here's the BadApp32 one. Let me expand this out. The BadApp32 where I ran that executable that had a crash. And so now that crash that occurred on that Windows 7 computer has been forwarded to this server. So a pretty good way of consolidating event subscriptions so that you don't have to go around and visit each machine. There are also diagnostics tools that you can use to analyze some of those event log errors that you receive. I mean, sometimes the event logs will be obvious as to what's causing the problem, but other times you'll need to actually dig into this a little bit. Some of the tools I've already explored a little bit in previous nuggets, such as system configuration, also known as msconfig. Remember, one of the key benefits of something like msconfig is that you can look at the startup properties and you can selectively diagnose what's going on there. You can choose to load only basic devices and services, for example. And if the problem goes away when you do it this way, then you know it's some additional device or service. There's also selected startup, so you can pick and choose again what's going to start up for yourself there. You can go to the boot properties and boot to additional operating systems if you have a dual boot scenario, for example. Oh, here's another thing. Another thing that I like about this is this safe boot item. I mean, I always seem to be able to miss hitting the F8 key just in time. So this is a great way to forcibly apply safe boot without having to be Johnny on the spot with hitting the F8 key right in time. And you can also disable certain services here and then click OK or apply. And then when you restart the computer, it'll omit that service from that one reboot. Although in subsequent reboots, it will still add it back in. For the startup item, you might want to identify various applications that start up that might be causing conflicts or crashes or problems, and you may want to deselect one of those items. Maybe this one's causing me a problem, so I could deselect it and see if the problem continues to occur. And then there's a variety of tools that you can access in other ways as well, such as through Control Panel, that's also available for you. Another item I really like here is Task Manager, and one of the reasons why I like it is because it's a very quick and easy way to get an idea of what's going on in the system right now. You see, here it'll tell me what my current CPU usage is, and I can see whether I'm pegged at 90% or 100%. If that's the case, there might be some application that is taking up too much CPU utilization. It might be hung in some way or be caught in a loop that it can't seem to get out of, and I might need to end that task. A lot of other things we see here going on are the amount of memory that I have that's currently being used. Now, this is something that we can use if we feel like we're getting a lot of paging, for example. The more memory that's being used of the actual physical RAM you have, the busier that hard drive is going to be because it's going to have to use the paging file more often. And then if you did have something like maybe CPU utilization was too high or memory was too high, you might want to go into the various processes that you have going on here, and you can see what is using the most CPU cycles at this time. Now, right now, I've got a pretty good world going on. I don't really have a lot that's hogging too many CPU utilization, too much in the way of CPU utilization, but I can also check over here to see what's using up a lot of memory. And I can see, I can sort on this column, and I can see that Photoshop, even though it's only got a few simple files open, is 267 megabytes right now. Don't ask me to explain this, but to me, Photoshop is a real hog on memory. I don't understand why it has. In fact, yesterday when I was working with Photoshop, again with just a few simple files open, had over a gigabyte of RAM in use. I don't know why it has to use so much sometimes. Anyway, if I identify that one of these things is causing me a problem and I would really like to have it close, but sometimes when you click on the little X in the upper right-hand corner, it just doesn't want to close, or it's not responding properly, or it does not respond to any input from you, then one of the things you can do here is to right-click here to choose End Process. And if there's multiple other little applications or other dependencies that run in conjunction with that, I could choose End Process Tree at the risk of closing an additional application that I might not have expected and potentially losing any data that I had not saved. But at the benefit of cleaning up the entire process and not leaving behind certain remnants that may still cause me certain kinds of problems there. So I could just click on End Process Tree and then click End Process Tree. Now, in my case, I may not want to do that. Let me show you why. I'm running Photoshop to do my whiteboard that you see here in the background, and if I choose End Process Tree, then there may be other things that both Acrobat, which comes from Adobe, and Photoshop, which also comes from Adobe, are gonna depend upon. So that could crash my Photoshop here in the background. So in this case, I'll actually just choose End the Process for Acrobat, and it was only holding open that one little document that I showed you about how to do the event collecting. Other things I might want to do with this is to give something a little bit higher priority. So, for example, here I've got Microsoft Word running, and if I right-click on this, maybe it's running some kind of a calculation on a table. Maybe I probably ought to be using Excel to do that. But as it is, I've got Word open, and I'm just doing the best that I can with it. Well, if it seems to be running really slow and it's trying to do a lot of number crunching, I could set the priority over here to a higher level. Right now it's at normal, but I could choose it to above normal or high. Now the thing about this is it's not really going to make any difference unless there's already contention for the processor. If I'm only at 20-30% processor utilization as it is, then Word is probably not contending a lot with other processes. But if there's a lot of applications that are trying to access the processor at once, then I could use these options to give Microsoft Word a higher priority, and I can click Change Priority. Some applications have a little bit of a hard time with that and may become more unstable as you do that, but most applications you probably can work okay with that. There's also this Set Affinity item here, and you can see here that I'm using all my processors, and it's a single physical processor, but it's quad core. So I could choose, in this case, to say only use CPU 3 and then click OK. And now it's only going to use that particular processor. But again, I don't really see why you'd want to do that on a workstation. Maybe on a server where you want to dedicate something to a specific CPU, but not usually on workstations unless I want to make my performance worse. my performance, the computer's performance. That sounded kind of awkward, didn't it? I assure you I have mostly no performance. It must be those vicious internet rumors I'm listening to. Anyway, what we could do with this also is to show performance. Now, see, I can't get off of that. Show processes from all users. And that would be the case if I had additional users logged on, such as in fast user switching, or if I wanted to see what other services were accessing. For example, this is a service account that might be doing something, or the system itself. You can also go to the Applications tab, and that's, by the way, where it takes you the first time you open this. And if you're having troubles with a specific item, you can right-click on it and choose End Task, but you can't end the tree from here. But if you wanted to go to Process, then certainly you could do that. There's also the services. If I'm having problems with a specific service, I don't know, whatever that thing is, for example, then I could right-click on this and stop that service. But you do have to know which one you're stopping, because some of these are critical to the operation of Windows. So make sure that it's one that you think you're having some kind of a specific problem with. Also notice that if I stop one of these services, let me just find one that's running here, for example. If I stop this, then it will only be for the purposes of our current session. If I restart the computer, it'll start back up again if it was already set to auto start, for example. This is the performance item, which I showed you earlier. Also notice there's this resource monitor item. I'm going to come back to that. It's a very powerful tool for identifying your performance. And then there's the networking item, and I really like this. We didn't used to have this in older versions of Task Manager, but this one will show me the throughput that's going on my existing network adapters. So if I'm downloading a big file and it seems like it's going kind of slow, then I might look in here and see, oh, it's only coming down at 256K. Maybe there's a problem with my ISP or whatever. Then there's also the users item, and this will identify all the users that I currently have logged on. And if I have multiple users, then I could do other things, such as that other user that's maybe in a session here. I could right-click there and then send them a message, which I can't do if there's only one user. But then I can also log that user off, or potentially even remote control that user. Although remote control is something that you can only do if you're currently in a remote desktop session. You cannot do that locally. You have to be in your own remote desktop session and then control another user's session. Now, there are a couple of other really good tools here. One of those is Resource Monitor. The other one's Performance Monitor. Let's start with Performance Monitor. As we take a look at this, you can see that it's accessible in Control Panel, and down here under Performance, you can also access the same tool on its own without this rest of this console from within the Administrative Tools Start menu. But once you get into this, you can identify a number of different criteria that you want to monitor in Performance Monitor. Let me go ahead and give us a little bit more room there. So if we take a look at it, keep trying to give ourselves room here, and I'm running out of space. There we go. If we take a look at this, we can see that already by default, it only includes the processor. All right, so that's the only thing that you're going to have right from the beginning. And if I want to add additional counters, then I can do that. So it's going to normally take these from the local computer, but you can connect to remote destinations as well, as long as you don't have firewall issues blocking the way. And then for the processor here, I can choose the total, which would be the total cumulatively of all of these. So if it showed me, for example, 40% processor utilization, that would be in some combination of all four of these. One of them might only be 10%, and the other ones might be 5% or something like that. It could all add up to whatever 40% is. So I could click on Add for that item. Also, if you wanted to be more specific with some of these, you can say, I only want to know the percent of interrupt time. And this is sometimes useful if you have something like a hardware device that's giving you a problem or that's starting to go faulty, because very often faulty hardware will send out more interrupts than it would normally do. And so that's how it is able to gain access to the processor under normal conditions. But if it's sending out dozens or hundreds of interrupt requests per second, then you know that there's a problem there. You can also identify additional types of counters, and most of the ones that you can look for are going to relate to memory. Okay, so you can check those out. For example, here's memory right here, and then I can identify how many available megabytes that we have, for example. And then I can also identify another item, and that would actually relate to the physical disk. Now, that identifies issues with the physical disk itself as well as memory, because if I'm low on memory, then the physical disk is going to be paging more. So I might want to see percentage of disk time. That might be a good counter to add in here as well. And then you can see how many bytes are being read to or written per second, how many transfers per second. A lot of different counters like this. Some of this will depend upon what your specific requirements and needs are. Now, as you take a look at this, some of these as well are going to be a little bit more difficult to decipher because if you had a whole bunch of counters in here, they get kind of hard to read. But if you press Control H, that will turn on the highlighting item, and the bold item will be the one that you have currently selected down here. Okay, so if I select a different item here, then it would show that item as well. Let me try to find one here that's a better candidate for that. How about, I think interrupts per second will probably get me there. Let's try that one. Okay, so I'll do Control H for enter. There we go. So you can see something that kind of floats above here that gives me a little bit more of a counter in terms of how many interrupts per second I'm getting. And if you want to delete any of these, you can just hit the little X for the delete key, and that would, of course, get rid of it. And then I'm going to go ahead and just pause this for the time being. I'll let it run for a little while so we'd have a little bit more data there. But I'm going to pause this for a moment and go over to the Performance Monitor properties. And you'll notice that here I can specify what kinds of things to show up there. For example, the legend. That would be this part down at the bottom that identifies what colors correspond to which counters. The value bar, which gives me a scale. And then the toolbar, which you can kind of see in the background up here at the top, so that you can pause the counter, add additional counters, and the like. The report and histogram data as well. You can see some self-explanatory items there, so I can identify, for example, my maximums. And you can tell it also how often to sample. Now, by default, it does it every 1 second, but you can make that less frequent if you like. And that might be useful if you're trying to do a trend analysis of a computer over the period of, let's say, several days or a week or something like this. And then for a source, you can identify the current activity as your source, or if you can also save all of the activity that's going on in the background there. You can save that in a log, and then you can open it up at a later time to be able to view it and analyze it a little bit better. You can also save it in a database if you have that facility. In the data item here, this is the various items that I've currently added into my counters, and I can then just change the color if I want to make it more visible, or mostly this is a matter of preference. And then on the graph side of things here, I can choose whether I want to have it wrap around the side or whether I want it to scroll. It just depends on, again, a matter of preference. And you can specify additional items there to kind of give you a marker in terms of the axes and things of this nature. And then, of course, the appearance, again, is mostly largely just preferential and somewhat arbitrary. I guess I lost my data. Better get something going again here. The other thing we could do with this is you can choose that you want to view the log data. So if you have any log files that you want to open up then that you've saved previously, then you will open them up in this view, and then they'll be static and won't be moving along every second like you see it going on right now. Then you can also go to whether you want to see it in a line or a histogram bar, like we see here, just a different perspective on things to give you a little bit of a different way of viewing it. And then you can also view it by reports where you get actual live numbers going on as well. Now I'm going to go a little bit out of order here because I'm going to go from Performance Monitor right here down here to the data collector sets because they're part of the interface there. So I'm going to come back and cover some of the other things here in a little while. But you can see here that I can run System Diagnostics or System Performance. Now I've already got System Performance running in the background here. But what it does is it will keep track of these various kinds of performance counters. And if I click on Properties, you can see that it's the main counters that you would probably always want to count anyway. So rather than me having to come up with this on my own, Microsoft has already done it for me. And then you can see here that it's going to save this in a performance counter file for me. So very handy, but I could also go up to user defined and create my own data collector set as well. However, most of the things that I would want are probably already included in this item. And then there's also NT kernel items that you can see here as well that programmatically might be useful for us. But not normally for the casual browser, but for programmers, they may be able to make some use of that. There's also System Diagnostics, which I can also start. This actually lasts 10 minutes, and it is pre-configured to last 10 minutes. The System Performance item ran for 60 seconds. So I guess I'm going to take about a 10-minute break, and when I come back, we'll see a lot of these counters, and this gives you quite a bit of verbose data. You do have to take that into account because it actually consumes resources just to be able to track all of these things. So if my performance hit is a little bit low during this time, understand that I have to subtract that from this. And then down here under the reports is where we're actually going to be able to see these counters. We can see here that I've got a system counter going on for the System Diagnostics. I've already had a couple of those going on. And then I've got my System Performance, which I created just a few moments ago. And then when we take a look at our various performance items here, the thing that we're interested in is the summary that we see up here at the top. and you can just kind of get a bird's eye view of everything. And then also, green is good usually. So this means I get green lights all the way down. It's just like drag racing. 3, 2, 1, go. Everything's fine. If I see a red button, however, a red light, then something's wrong. On one of my other systems, for example, it showed a red, I think it was for disk, because there was quite a lot of thrashing going on. And at the time what was going on was a RAID array was rebuilding. It had a problem earlier. So this is the kind of idea you get. If you want to know more details about any one of these items, then you can just go down to whatever it is that concerns you, and you can click the down arrow and see various subcategories. Or if you want to just jump right to what you know would concern you the most, you can go down here to processor performance and go right there. And that would then expand the appropriate area for you. Okay, so a very good way of being able to identify a lot of this stuff. The system diagnostics, which is now completed here, you can see that that is quite verbose information. And you can see here that it's going to give you even more data. So basically, you just have a whole bunch of information to work with, and in terms of this type of a resource, it's fairly easy to read. Now let's go back up here and talk about this resource monitor. This is something that I actually like quite a lot within Windows 7 here. And let me close this all out. And that's going to be found on the All Programs menu underneath Accessories. And then you'll find that again under System Tools down here where we have Resource Monitor. This is kind of the long way to get there. I find it easier just to access the Task Manager, which you can get from right-clicking on the taskbar and choosing Task Manager. Or my preferred method is actually to press Control-Shift-Escape simultaneously. And then I immediately click here to Resource Monitor. And once we get into this, I can then identify, it's kind of like Task Manager in certain ways because it identifies running processes that are going on, but it gives you a little bit more room in terms of the graphics to identify what the different processes are doing. You also have a little bit more flexibility here and some of the capabilities to view additional resources besides just CPU and memory. For example, here's disk, and I can identify maybe what is using the most read and write resources. So I could say what's writing to the disk the most often, what's reading to the disk most often. And there's nothing unusual here because I don't have any other applications really running. But I could see, if there was a big file being written or, something like Photoshop was working with multi-100 megabyte files, then that might be an issue. We can also take a look at what's using network utilization here. Okay, so we can see what kind of processors are going on in addition to the addresses that are involved in the network utilization and memory as well. And then if you want to look at some more specifics of any of these, you can go to the Processes tab, for example, and see which services might be using varying amounts of CPU. And similarly, you can look at memory as well as disk and network as well. So this resource monitor is a very cool tool for all of those kinds of things. Probably the one I use the most frequently now, probably even more than Task Manager. The thing is with this, you don't really have a save item. I mean, you can save the settings, but you don't really save the data. So this is all real-time view, similar to the way that Task Manager itself is a real-time view. Now, the reliability monitor started out with Windows Vista. This is something that continues on in Windows 7 and that I like quite a lot. If you go into Control Panel, you'll be able to find Reliability Monitor, but there's quite a few clicks involved, so I usually just go right to the search pane, click on the Start button and then click and type Reliability, and it'll pop this open in your search results. And this I like a lot because it shows me a trend analysis of what's been going on. And I'm using my own machine for this. I've had a lot of various applications installed. I've had some troubles with some Photoshop plugins that have really been crashing with a recent update. So that could be part of the problems that we've had in here. But you can see here that at a 10, then that's our highest level of performance with virtually no crashes or hangs or other kinds of problems at all. Whereas you can go, descend down this stair step here till you find where you're having some certain problems. For example, if I click on this day, which we can see right here, then I can see that I had an application failure. Okay, what application was it? Well, it was the MMC console stopped responding. Sometimes that just happens. Okay, it was just a bad day. Not much you can do about that. And it's the MMC console, which is what it is. But there are sometimes other things that might have crashed as well that might be causing problems that you do have the ability to fix. Let's see what else was going on here. Okay, Microsoft Word stopped responding at a certain time. So I might be able to identify maybe there's a bug fix for that. Maybe it's just the file that I had was corrupt, and so it kept trying to open a file that was unopenable. And maybe that was an issue. So at least I can identify. Then I had applications being installed, or I had programs that kept crashing, different kinds of things that might have happened. There could be drivers that were installed also that have caused problems as well. And now here I have a warning. I haven't even looked at this in advance, but you can see some different things going on here. I was trying to install a smart card reader, but it didn't have drivers for Windows 7, so some problems that I was getting with that item. But you can see here that as I look at my reliability, and if it trends downward and kind of stays there over a little period of time, I want to see what's going on with that. And I want to look at these days and see what's causing the problem. Now, I already talked about the system diagnostics and system performance. Now let's talk about the problem steps recorder, also known as PSR, and you can see it right here. This is very useful when you have a user that you don't have the ability to work with remote assistance, so you can't see their desktop, and they're having difficulty describing what they're doing. Or you might want to just reproduce their steps and see if you can reproduce the same error, for example, that they might be seeing. Well, the problem steps recorder is pretty much a screenshot recorder. It identifies what you do with your keyboard and mouse and the various actions you take, so that you can then save this into a zip file and send it to maybe a help desk or something like this. So for example, maybe Photoshop here crashes every time I change the color palette for my little pen down here. So let's say I start record, and it's just identifying that I've got some other applications being run under a different identity, which is the administrator account. And then let's say I'm over here changing color to, I don't know, violet. And then when I go over here, it identifies every place that I tap with my little electronic pen here, and identifies all the different things that I'm doing here. So if I change to, some other color, so I'm just kind of marking the place up, and what you'll see happening here then is I can then stop recording, and I can also add a comment, and you can say, I changed, pen color when program crashed. Okay, so then I click OK, and then I'll stop recording. At which point it gives me an opportunity to save this file somewhere. I'll just call it, problem.zip. Then once that's been done, you'll see here that I'll have the zip file itself. And when I open up the zip file, there's an MHT file here. Wow, that's kind of ingenious. What is that? Well, that's going to be my problem steps recorder format. It's actually an HTML, actually you can see it over here, an HTML type of a document. But what this does is it allows it to open up here in Internet Explorer. Let me bring this in here. And it's kind of hard to see now because we just have limited resolution. But you can see here that here's my entire desktop. I've actually got two halves of this. This is actually a panoramic photograph of the Grand Tetons. But this is my left monitor, and this is my right monitor, where I was doing all of my recordings, my whiteboard stuff, and all of that kind of stuff. All right. So then what we could do in here is I could then zoom in on this, or zoom out. And then I can also go back to my previous location. And then I can just see the various things they did. It's telling me that I did a user left click in a certain location in this PSD file that I was working with. This is just all the various steps that I went through, and then I can identify also the various comments that I may have made and so forth. So this is a really good way to reproduce the steps that somebody has taken to try to track down what they were doing. Additional diagnostics tools that I have include something like the power problems that I might be experiencing. This is mostly going to relate to laptop computers, but it could also apply to desktop computers. For example, maybe we want all of our computers, and you can do this by group policy, to go into suspend every night, after 2 hours of inactivity. And then that way we can save probably thousands of dollars overnight in larger corporations because there's very little power going to those desktops. But let's say that there's a whole department where none of them seem to go into suspend or sleep. Well, what I could do is to run PowerCFG Energy on one of the representative problem computers that I'm having this problem with, and then I can see if there's something that's causing it to hang up. So let's say PowerCFG Energy, and there's a great deal of options with the PowerCFG command. I'm just going to go ahead and run this for the time being. But what this will do is identify something that might have been preventing it from going into suspend, such as maybe there's something that's network traffic that's going on that's keeping the network card awake. Some power settings will allow you to resume the computer through network activity. Or it could be that there's a USB device attached that is not allowing it to go into sleep. So there's other kinds of things like that can go on. Now then, when this thing is done, you can see here that it will save the report to the energyreport.html, but notice where this is. System32 by default. That's going to be a problem because what you want to do is to open this up in your web browser. But in this location, because of security issues, the system will not allow you to open it up. And it's kind of weird because you'll double click on it over and over again and nothing will happen. You'll just kind of wonder, what am I doing wrong? Did I forget how to double click? So what you do is you copy that to something like your desktop. And once you've done that, you should then be able to open that up. And I've opened it up here in Google's Chrome, which is the browser of choice for me. And you can see here the different kinds of things that could be affecting the power plan here. One thing I found kind of interesting was they call it the power policy power plan personality. It's a highly charged personality, apparently, because I'm on high performance. And that's just telling me that I'm using a lot of electricity. Okay, what can I say? I only want to give the most that I possibly can to all of our wonderful listeners out there. All right, and this tells me just some things that could be affecting it. Maybe if I was trying to do something like put it in suspend or something like that, different things that would affect it. This looks like a lot, but it's not uncommon on a desktop machine. On a workstation, or rather on a laptop, I might be a little bit more concerned about some of those different items if I couldn't get it to go to sleep or to shut down properly. That's another thing this could be useful for, is to identify problems with shutdown processes. So anyway, this gives you a great deal of information on all of those items. And then there's this tool called Process Explorer, which is written by a guy named Mark Rustanovich. If any of you are pretty deep into Windows and have read a lot of Windows books and so forth, you've probably read his Inside Windows, whatever, Windows Server 2003 or whatever his books are. And he's a prolific writer, and he's got a great deal of programming knowledge, and he's highly respected in the Windows community. So much so, in fact, that after a period of time, Microsoft actually just bought him and brought him into the Microsoft fold, and he's a fellow there now at Microsoft. But you can see here that he's got this utility called Process Explorer, which he still works on, and you can download that directly now from Microsoft's website. One thing that's kind of interesting about this is that I'm on a 64-bit processor here, but initially it did not show this file. And this is all the stuff that I extracted to to a specific folder. But as soon as I double-clicked to run this, it created this 64-bit executable for me. I don't know why. It's just kind of interesting that it behaved that way. So anyway, what we have going on here is, let me try to get to it, is that when I double-click on it, it shows me all the specific processes that are running on this computer. Now, by default, it only shows you part of it. It shows you this much. And I can see different applications. I can't even, understand what some of these are, but let's take a look at Bridge. This is part of Photoshop as well. And I can see how much memory it's using. Okay, so that's kind of handy. I can identify its process ID. Certain kinds of applications and programmatic functions will have to know what the process ID, which changes, by the way, every time an application starts up. But I could kill a process using the kill command from a command line to kill that specific process ID, for example. Here's the disk keeper service. I could identify what's going on with that. This just gives you extremely verbose information, and if you do take a look at it, so it shows the lower pane here, then it will identify for you some of the things that are related to a specific item that's being used here. For example, if I click on this item, it shows me which DLLs that particular application is using. It shows me, different parts of the registry that it uses. So this is probably, this is a great deal of verbose information that could be very, very useful with deep kinds of problems. All right, folks, that's about it for today. I've got a huge craving for Oreo cookies, so I'm going to have to go satisfy that before I can record anymore. Here we talked about monitoring systems. We started off by talking about the event logs, such as the system application logs, the security logs, and also how we could audit object access. We took a look at diagnostics tools as well, of which there are a great many, and this is where we spend a good deal of our time looking at things like reliability monitor, problem steps recorder, and many other tools in this nugget. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.